Welcome to Impact Pasadena. It's my delight and honor to welcome Assemblymember Chris Holden, representing District 41 in California, and a longtime Pasadena resident and former city council member. We've been talking in the first segment about a little bit about how you came into public service and your work in the city council for 24 years in Pasadena, and then for the last 6 years in Sacramento and the Assembly. One of your, I think, very important jobs is chair of the Utilities and Energy Commission, which is a very active and very important committee. Could you talk a little bit about that committee and the work that you do there?
Yeah, thank you. It's a committee that, and quite frankly, the foundation for me in this area was laid here in Pasadena.
Oh, is that right?
You know, having a city council that gave leadership over a water and power company and navigated through a deregulation crisis, electricity deregulation crisis in the late 90s. So going into this role, I had that working for me. And it's a committee that really focuses on the regulatory agencies, the California Public Utility Commission, the California Energy Commission, and CARB. These are very important regional bodies, regulatory agencies that work with the utilities in California and ensure that they are meeting their mandates as they look to provide power to Californians. The utilities, primarily the public utilities, as well as the investor-owned utilities like Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric and Pacific Gas and Electric, are the three major utilities that we provide leadership over, and the public utilities to some of the municipals like Pasadena, Los Angeles, Sacramento, SMUD, and others. But that combined represents all of the energy companies, for the most part, that provide power. Then we have energy-related companies because we've sort of embarking on new areas of renewables, and out of that, new companies are being formed, whether it's solar, wind-related, storage companies that find their way to our committee to find support for their burgeoning industries. You
know, I suppose that in the past this might have been the sort of routine in terms of the utilities, but now it's such a controversial area, not just in terms of consumers, because everybody's, you know, you get your utility bill, the cost goes up, we have energy and water shortages, there's an environmental impact to this. It relates to some degree, I suppose, now to the wildfires and the role of the utility companies and all that. So I don't know where to start.
I know. Well, let me say that, and one other stakeholder that finds their way into all of this are the trades. So the labor groups that represent the trades, the electrical workers for the most part, because whatever we're doing also potentially impacts on jobs, and those are the workers who are providing those jobs. But yeah, it's very complicated, but at the same time, it's trying to find the way to architect a strategy that provides for the lowest rate to the ratepayer, reliability and rate sometimes can go exchange positions because we want to, anytime we need the power, you want to be able to have it accessible, and safety. And certainly as it relates to the safety piece, we can see that last year in 2017 was a cataclysmic year for wildfires and the impact on the state. Acres that were burned, lives that were lost, private properties that were destroyed, and most of those fires occurred in Northern California, the wine country, and that's Pacific Gas and Electric, or PG&E's territory. Potentially some impact, to Edison, because their area was also impacted in the Ventura community. But with climate change, being in the midst of a drought for as long as we have been, the conditions in those foothill areas and in the canyons is such where there's a lot of dry brush. The brush hasn't been properly cleared out over the years, and so that's just fuel ready to explode. And then we've also seen hurricane force winds that make their way through those caverns. So when there's a fire, whether it's caused by a utility or not, because this year a lot of fires, none of them caused by utilities.
Is that right?
And the Carr fire was the largest that the state's ever had seen. But when those fires ignite and it hits that tinder, it just explodes. The flames go from historically 8 to 10 feet to roughly 22 feet high. And it's very hard for our first responders and firefighters to fight those. So California, because of climate change and because of drought conditions and because there's just a lot of issues that the utilities have to start to do that they haven't done, hardening their infrastructure, undergrounding cable where they can, hardening the poles and that type of thing, de-energizing, so knowing when to shut the power down to help when you're expecting high winds, then you can shut the power down to help alleviate any potential crisis along those lines. So there's a lot of new things that we're
sure, and this is really, climate change is here. It's not there's nothing speculative about it. We're seeing it week in and week out. One of the issues that's come up is who's going to pay for all this?
Right.
Is it insurance companies? Is it utility companies if they're at fault? Is it consumers? And climate change is going to be expensive, and even if we do all that we can to deal with it, we're still going to be incurring a lot of losses and expenses. What's the solution here?
It is expensive, but what we did, because we always want to make sure that the victims are protected, and so we did not, so in California they have strict liability that's in place, so a utility could be responsible, their equipment could have started a fire, but they weren't negligent in terms of how that fire was conducted. Maybe they did all the right things, cable came down under high force winds.
Well, that's what I would think, and the infrastructure is going to be vulnerable no matter what you do.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so at this point, with strict liability still in place, they could be a little bit responsible, but 100% liable. And so they have to pay out to the victims, they have to pay out to the insurance companies, and then they go to the California, the CPUC, to see if they can make an argument that had it not been for the bark beetle that killed the tree, hurricane force winds lifted a major part of the tree and took it the length of a football field into the line. The lines came down, and that's what caused the fire.
Right.
They want to be able to make that argument that they should be able to portion some of that expense back to the ratepayer.
Yeah.
And we kind of got there with our conference committee that we just concluded that laid out new rules that would allow for these utility companies to go before PUC and make that kind of an argument. The PUC may think it's a good argument and allow them to apportion. They say that 70% is the shareholders' responsibility, 30% would be the ratepayers that they could apportion the cost recovery from.
Right. I mean, the apportionment seems to be actually probably the fairest way. It's somebody's got to pay for it, and there may be some. The sharing may be actually the best unhappy solution.
Well, when you consider that PG&E may be on the hook for anywhere from $5 to $10 billion in the costs of 2017 fires, those are numbers that can send a company into bankruptcy.
Yes. Yeah.
And the ratepayers are impacted by that. So we had to, it was a tough process to navigate through, but I think we have a fair going forward, and even addressing 17 fires that would keep the utility healthy, and to be able to finance the ratepayers' costs over 20 years, so the impact is maybe $20 a month extra.
Yeah. It's interesting because this is indicative, illustrative anyway, of the, and when it comes to climate change, there's no silver bullets here. We're just going to have to be making a lot of tough choices.
The sea is rising.
Yeah.
Coastal communities potentially impacted as well. Yeah.
And you get to worry about it.
Well, the good news is, it's not really good news, but
Yeah.
it's one that I'm in a unique position of 120 legislators, but all of us as a concerned 40 million people in California will have to be vigilant.
Well, another aspect of this is transportation, and I know you played a leadership role in terms of the metro, the Gold Line extension of it. How's that working out?
Well, let's see. We were able to find money through cap and trade dollars this year to fill the gap that allows for the project, because Measure M was a little short in what it needed to have the line completed to Montclair, and we were able to identify additional resources through cap and trade dollars to finish that, fill that gap. So we're looking at that project, and quite frankly, the future is extension of the Gold Line. It may turn into another line as it makes its way into San Bernardino County, but San Bernardino should be very excited about trying to figure out how to move that regional transportation line into San Bernardino, Riverside County, Indio, down to Palm Springs. We probably won't be here to see that, but I think that's the future, and that's where hopefully the leadership will kick in.
In my experience, it's been a successful project, and it's highly utilized. And people always joked about the mass transit in Los Angeles, but here we are. We've got it.
We got it.
We got it.
It's exciting, and you're going to see development along the route that hopefully the focus will be on affordable housing integrated around the stations.
That seems to be the way it's working out. That's how it's happening in Pasadena. I think it's smart. People are resistant to development, but I think that it makes sense to center it around transportation. It's part of the future, I think.
It's where you can probably get more density than in the residential neighborhoods existing.
Yeah.
We
want to keep the character of Pasadena, but still look for the future and provide for young people.
That's exactly right.
The bullet train. Sorry.
Well, it's been the pet project of Governor Brown, and I think he has certainly exhibited leadership and understanding that whether it's the bullet train or tunnels to help move water from Northern California to Southern California, these are very big projects that impact on the environment, that positively, and in some cases as it relates to the tunnels, water tunnels, negatively. But I think that just having that vision, but there's still some question as to whether or not this project has built up enough momentum to where whoever the new governor is will have to continue to invest to see it to the end, or that it maybe takes on a different
I mean, we've
forward.
invested a lot already, haven't we, in this bullet train idea? And it would be a shame to see it stumble.
Back at the beginning, I would have loved to have seen maybe Congress reapportion the dollars for light rail, because we had projects like the Gold Rail at that time that could have used those resources, and those are project ready, and it would have been more regional. The high-speed rail, I think, is given the way that this state is shaped. It makes sense to have a high-speed way of moving on the ground from Southern California to Northern California. I still like making my way to Burbank Airport and getting on a flight that's only going to take 55 minutes to get to Sacramento. But for a lot of people,
I think people who've traveled a little bit can see that most other developed countries and some countries that are still developing have effective high-speed transportation, and you wonder why it's so difficult here. But that's probably a longer subject than we have time for. Speaking of which, I'd love to get into the issue of immigration. And now I know that we have federal immigration laws, and we are all pretty familiar about what's going on in Washington around that, and the kind of the quagmire that we're in. But then California has a particular challenge, which is we have a very diverse population, and we have people here who are undocumented, and we want to provide for them as individuals. They may not have full rights, but as citizens, but this has been a real controversial topic. What role can California legislators play in this, or our executive, other than to resist some of the more draconian steps that are being taken in Washington?
Well, as you know, the federal government has utilized their ICE program to kind of come in and take a heavy-handed approach in terms of breaking up families and taking kids out of schools. And so what we've done in recent times is pass bills that would allow for the principals of schools to not basically cooperate under those circumstances, that the children needed to be kind of kept in a safe environment until the family could be contacted and brought together. So there was, there was an attempt really by the federal government to take kids out of school. And so we have put in place laws that would push back against that. The focus on dreamers and giving these young people who were born here an opportunity to have the ability to be educated at the highest level and to be promoted, I think it was the right thing to do. I know that even in Congress there is a recognition that notwithstanding the president's leaning to a different approach, I think that there is still a recognition that these young people not only are but can be the future producers of this country and its ideals and new ideas and creative thinking, and they're being educated here. And I think it's a real opportunity to position them to be part of future leadership. I think that there are things that we have been able to do here in California that I think have been very appropriate in addressing the human side of what these families and young people are going through. And it was certainly drawn home here recently when the federal government decided to take their kids out of the arms of the parents. We do find that we're a little handicapped, though, because when things like that happen and we're outraged by it, we can put forth a resolution, but it's directing Congress to direct the White House.
Yeah, I mean, for those who probably don't understand the relationship between the federal government and the state government, the federal law, it takes precedent. You can't pass a law that doesn't. One of the things that came up I thought that was interesting had been a debate, and I think it's resolved now. I'm probably not up to speed on this, but driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. To me, that was, if nothing else, a safety issue.
Completely.
and it seems to me it makes perfect sense to license somebody who's going to operate a motor vehicle and not have people running around the streets, driving around the streets who are not qualified to drive.
Well, and since they're working here, it seemed to be the appropriate next step, and then as you say, to address the issue of safety and making sure that whoever's on the road is licensed to be
and
on
we
the
do
road.
have that law in place now, as my understanding.
Yeah.
And the other thing about is our economy, because we're in a fortunate position, I think, in America, and particularly in California, that a lot of developed countries have a very aging population and they're losing their workforce. But because of our strong immigration, we're able to maintain a younger workforce and hopefully into the future. So it's good economics as well.
I think one of the things that when we talk about California as the 5th largest economy in the world, we're a nation state. And so to that end, we are recognizing that everyone is valuable, everyone has their oar in the water and contributing to that economic status. And so to that end, far be it for us to then start to reap the benefits of the labor of people who are here providing it and not giving any kind of benefits back. That would not seem to be the right thing to do.
I think we thought this was a settled question that we wouldn't be discussing so much in the future, but here we are again. And speaking of settled questions, when Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, people were very excited because it's the first African-American president that we'd had, and we really saw this as a breakthrough and possibly a breakthrough in race relations. I think we were wrong, as recent times have shown. So you have been the chair, I guess is the right word to say, of the Black Caucus in the Assembly. And I think most of us are disturbed by the climate of racial relations in the country. And as we thought about it, we realized, it's not going to be that simple after a 200-year history.
Yeah.
But give me your thoughts about where we're going and how you see the future in terms of race relations.
I'm optimistic. I look at my kids and I see how race is not an issue for them, for their generation.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that for all, but I do see that there's sort of this recognition that there's harmony, there's ability to work together.
Yeah.
And you see it also playing out on the national election scene. In November, there's going to be African American who's vying for the governorship in Florida as well as Georgia, Maryland, and so that's really exciting. I think that there's clearly issues out there or demons that have not been completely wrestled to the ground,
right.
And I think that this administration has found a way to awaken them and not only awaken them but give them a voice, and it's played out in ways that have, I think, hurt the image of America, but it has not, I think, really destroyed the integrity of the people who their spirit represents America. And so I'm like to believe that it is being somewhat isolated. I think that what I found, quite frankly, was very emotional was the recent funeral services for John McCain. And his daughter spoke out about how this is not about making America great again. America's always been great. And as long as we believe that and hold on to those truths, that it's this is a work in progress, this democracy, and it is a union that is still striving to be more perfect. But at the same time, I think the tent has been demonstrated that it is broad enough and that we are at a place to recognize an exceptional individual who was able to demonstrate themselves as capable to lead this country, not just for African Americans, but for everyone. And I think President Obama was able to do that. And I think that John McCain also represented what was great about this country also, that you don't have to always agree, but still understand that what's fundamental to what makes the country great is still alive and well. But what we're seeing now is sort of an erosion at the common decency that I think we all come to expect, not only in our elected officials. We want to see the highest of character and integrity, but it's also starting to affect all of us in terms of how we feel as we push back against that.
Right, and a little pushback on what you're saying. I think that for whites, some of the rose-colored glasses have begun to fall off in the post-Obama era to see things like racial profiling and to sort of be able to experience it vicariously a little bit more. I think this is something that the average white person just wasn't able to kind of empathize or understand. And I think that the racism that's come out on the extremes has made those people heighten their consciousness, perhaps, which I think is probably a good sign, but at the same time, it's quite discouraging. And I think that's something the African American community has lived with for a long time and understands, but it's just kind of seeping into the mainstream.
Yeah. No, look, I think you're right, and I think that there's and that's, I think that, the old saying, we don't know what another person has to go to unless we walk in their shoes. And so when you start to allow yourself to see, wow, that goes, and sometimes it's class as well as race. So it's if you're in an affluent or if you're in a position where your life is comfortable, whether you're black or white or Latino or Asian or other, you don't, and your family is protected, you sort of live in this sort of bubble, and you're not necessarily thinking about a fellow African American, Latino, white, or other who might be struggling
Yep.
and up against a system that's not really designed
Yep.
to give them a lift up. And I think sometimes that comes through now because so much is being done to expose us and to see how systems are becoming more oppressive. The jail system, the criminal justice system, in terms of who's in jail as opposed to who's in school.
Right.
And our universities is very stark, where you see African American and Latinos. And I think that as we start to allow ourselves to say, wait a minute, I can't just read this in a headline and move on with my life. I have to recognize that as a citizen of this country, I'm only as good and as free as the person who is now locked up in a prison where they maybe didn't commit the crime.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that the class element is there and is stark too. I mean, you have a number of minority groups and communities where you have Trump support because they're suffering economically, or they feel discriminated against because of their class. And that I think one of the challenges for the Democratic Party is to look less in terms of racial and ethnic identities and also more in terms of class identity. And this is something that the Democrats were able to embrace for such a long time after the New Deal, but life has changed to some degree, and we need to get back in touch with those roots of ours.
It's funny when you think about it, and Dr. King's march on Washington was about jobs.
Yeah.
It was about poverty. It was about, and so when he talked about having a dream, it was about creating opportunities for those who had not but needed opportunity, and who were wanted to just be treated as a man, be given an opportunity. And we see that even today, even in the advent of having had an African American as president, that many of those issues are still unmet for those who are living that reality. And when you have challenges between police, as an example, and communities of color, there's tension because there's, I think, a recognition that the people that are being dealt with are guilty before innocent. And so the process, the policies are not designed necessarily, because it's a paramilitary operation that is now the front line,
Right.
And I think that's creating some tensions that need to be addressed.
I appreciate that you bring up about Dr. King, because it's true. A lot of his beliefs and his hopes and his principles were not based so much on race as they were on human dignity across all lines. And he argued against poverty. He argued for opportunity and against war. In fact, this is a great note to end on. I think we've really covered a lot today, and it's just been my pleasure to have you here and to get to know you a little better and talk some more about the challenges that we face. Thanks so much for all you do and for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.